So now we're going to be talking about probability. Now, you may have heard of probability in one way or another in your daily life. For example, um, you hear people say that there's a 20% chance of rain tomorrow, right? That's probability. In this course, we're gonna do a formal treatment of the topic and hopefully give you a better idea of what probability is and what are the basic properties of probability. So let's first define probability. Probability is just a numerical measure of the likelihood that an event will occur. Okay. Um, Again, an example of probability, as I said earlier, is there's a 20% chance of rain tomorrow, right? So you put a numerical measure on the likelihood that it will rain. We're gonna start by defining a few more things that will help us understand probability, so bear with me. Let's now talk about an experiment. So, an experiment is a process that generates well defined outcomes. And by well defined, what we mean is that each repetition of the experiment produces one and only one outcome. So let's look at an example. Let's say we play West Florida in a football game, right? So UWG versus West Florida in football. Okay. Each time we play West Florida, there's only one outcome, right? We Either we win, we lose, or we tie. Right? You can't have a game where West Georgia both win and tie or both lose and tie. Okay? So a football game is an example of an experiment. Every time the game is played, there's only one outcome. Another example is suppose you flip a coin. Right? Every time you flip a coin, you get either a head or a tail. Right? You don't get both. Now, let's now talk about the sample space. So the sample space of an experiment is the set of all experimental outcomes. And the sample space is typically denoted by the capital letter S. So for example, we talked about the football game, right? So for a football game, the sample space S consists of is a set that consists of three elements: win, lose, or tie, right? And then for the coin flipping example, the sample space is the set S that contains two elements: head and tail. We then define a sample point as a particular outcome of an experiment. In other words, a sample point is an element of the sample space, right? So in the football game example, we have three sample points. And then in the coin flipping example, we have two sample points. And then finally, we want to define what an event is. So an event is defined as a collection of sample points. Now, what does this mean exactly, right? So for the football game example, it's easy to think of an event as, win, lose, or tie, right? An event in that case consists of only one sample point. That's normal, right? So nothing too fancy. But then an event can consist of more than one sample point. Let me write down that first. So an event, let me go football game example. Right, we're looking at football game. One sample point, events, win, lose, tie, right? Okay. But then we can also have two sample point events. For example, if I define my event as not losing, okay, so if my event is not losing, then it consists of two sample points, right? Either winning or tying, right? And depending on how many sample points you have in the sample space, you can have events that have more than 2 sample points. Okay? But the idea I want to get across here is that an event doesn't necessarily contain just one sample point. It can contain more than one sample point. Okay? And so that leads us to the final definition that we want to know, which is that the probability of an event probability of an event is equal to the sum of the probabilities of the sample points in the event. Okay, for example, the probability of not losing would be equal to the probability of winning plus the probability of tying. So in this video, we define a bunch of things related to probability that we will see over and over again going forward.